What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? 6:30 on the dot on a Monday. Happy Monday afternoon. Hope everybody's week started out well out there. I mostly caught up on my sleep today. Put in a marathon over the weekend as usual with getting everything together for football. Monday's kind of a catch-up day. We've got everything up on the site. Projections for tonight are live up on the site. I'll run through, make sure that everything's updated if there are any news changes, but I think we're pretty much locked in for what's going to be going on with this game. We've got Pope in the chat. Pope says, happy Monday. Had 4 lines in the top 25 for last night's showdown, another 3X, and looking forward to tonight playing DK and FanDuel. I love it. That sounds great, buddy. Congratulations. Sounds like a pretty nice night. I know we had some good weekends out there. Lone Wolf had a good weekend. Saw some others. I had a pretty solid little weekend as well. Profitable Sunday. Always good. Felt like we were on point for most of everything we talked about on the Sunday marathon show, or the Saturday marathon show, the Friday night show. A lot of stuff we talked about came through. A lot of the chalk came through. Running back chalk came through. But we were over the field on a good portion of it. I was pushing a good portion of it in the above-below column. So hopefully everybody was on a lot of those plays and put together some good lineups. Had a lot of chasers. Thought for a little while I was going to get into the top little section of the main FanDuel contest, but solid profitable day. I'll take it any day. Kenneth Woodhouse is here. What's up, Ken? Pup says no fish, though. Cujo's here. What's up, Cujo? Melissa? What's going on? Ryan? Fanatic's here. What's up, Fanatic? Good to see you. So we've got an interesting one up tonight. Some definite curveball type plays, especially on that DraftKings slate. Some really cheap, interesting options at the running back position in Green Bay that we're going to have to talk about. I kind of like this one, though. A lot of usable parts. Couple of gettable defenses. Certainly neither defense really stands out. Pretty decent Vegas total. Close line. Couple of sides banged up on both sides. But should be an interesting one. I expect a decent amount of scoring. But Vegas has been all over the map this season. So we'll see what we get. But there's definitely some very good ways to put together lineups. Some very heavily owned players, obviously, as we get with showdowns. But there are some somewhat obvious, pivots to make, I think. I think we're going to see, Jacobs seems to be the predominant captain and MVP option on both sites. Jordan Love after that. And then if you go in any other direction, Devontae would come in next. But say you just go to Jimmy G. Pretty decent ownership number. If you have any faith in A.J. Dillon, pretty low owned. Christian Watson, Jacoby Myers, there's a lot of skill players that are getting very little attention in those captain spots. And I don't necessarily think that that's got to be the way that things go. I said it in the Discord yesterday. We didn't do a show for the Sunday game yesterday, for the Sunday night game. But I mentioned it in the Discord. I was talking to, I think, Dennis. And, I just said, just my main takeaway from looking at everything for that Sunday night game was just spread shares out. Christian McCaffrey is a great player, but he was loaded up with ownership last night. He was 50% owned in the MVP spot on FanDuel. That's insanity. So going to just any other option was a good move on the FanDuel slate at the MVP spot. Have a bunch of Christian McCaffrey, but undercut. I think it's going to be kind of similar tonight with Jacobs. So I think you can go different directions and kind of gain a lot of ground. Jacobs, is he the most likely to come through with a pretty big score going up against a pretty weak rush defense? Yeah. But, Devontae's right there. On the other side, you've got options. There's a lot of skill players to move around the board. So I think it's an interesting one. We'll get into it right now. We'll talk through the options, and then we'll take a look at some lineups. What time's the slate actually start? This is an 8:15 start. So I guess we'll shoot for a 7:15 would be ideal, but if we're out at 7:30, that's not bad. And there's not too much to talk about with just one game. Pope says, before the Jones news, my take was 28-24 Packers. I like Dobbs, and I like him more now that Jones is out. I agree. Dobbs certainly still a major feature in that offense. We'll talk about that, even with Watson coming back for, call it a half of what he would normally be doing out there. Dobbs still saw 13 targets last week. So definitely still a prime option in that offense. And if they're not able to generate anything on the ground, I could definitely see them slinging the ball around through the air a little bit. And you can see that on both sides. I do think that Jacobs is going to have a pretty significant day. Jacobs going, we'll go pull up the one that I can actually click on here. Jacobs down here, the most highly projected. No, Devontae outpaces him on the DK slate, just on catches. Similar on FanDuel. But Jacobs, Devontae, the obvious 1-2, even outpacing the quarterbacks in terms of the projections. Jacobs going up against a rush defense that's allowing 4.5 yards per rush attempt, 25th overall. On the other side, the Green Bay backs, pretty decent matchup as well. A 4.3 yards per rush attempt, 18th for the Raiders. So both sides should have the ability to run the ball. Green Bay's been decent against the pass. 6 yards per pass attempt ranks 12th. 6.6 yards per pass attempt for the Raiders ranks 18th. I think both of these defenses are gettable on both sides of the ball, though. So it's not like we're avoiding any part of this, or we're specifically saying, one of these four corners looks much better. But I like the opportunity for Jacobs to have kind of a standout game here. That said, as I was saying, going to be by far the most highly owned captain, the most highly owned MVP. So making just different decisions. And those would include Devontae with his massive projection, paying up for him, but well worth it. Draws major target shares. Draws tons of looks in the red zone. Gives you basically everything that you would want. Jacoby Myers, not an insignificant option in that offense as well. You've got the duel of the Carlsons. These guys are brothers, by the way, if you didn't know. I didn't know. I looked it up. So they're brothers. So they'll be battling one another. That's got nothing to do with the script of this game. But both of these teams can, if the stars aren't connecting, the downboard options become more questionable. So if these teams are struggling to get the ball in the end zone, could it become a battle where the kickers get involved to some degree at least? Sure. They project out fairly well for kicker projections. Trey's here. What's up, Trey? Trey says, seems like the public leaning Raiders, leaning Green Bay because of it. Watson, Dobbs, Love, captain. I like your options there. Love's going to be popular in the captain spot as well. Deservedly so. Scored twice on the ground, has 8 passing touchdowns already on the season. I question what he really is overall. He's been more valuable in terms of fantasy, I think, than real life. But we'll take that all day. I mean, we could definitely succeed with quarterbacks like that because this is fantasy. What else? Jake Swales is here. What's up, Jake? Pope says, without Jones, you lose a lot of pass protection, so I think Love will need it to get out quick to tight ends and slot receivers. Who are we thinking for DK cash games? Oh, you play cash for Showdown? Yeesh. I'm not really much of a cash game player anyway, Melissa. I would just kind of follow the obvious for cash. If you can get Jacobs and Devontae into a lineup, I think that's pretty good. If you can get those two and one of the quarterbacks, so much the better. You're getting very expensive at that point. But just kind of follow the obvious pass for cash. You can follow the ownership. Yeah, that's living dangerously tonight. Yeah. You're really going out on a limb there. Yeah, I would say you can easily follow the ownership. I don't want to show it on the screen. Is there a spot where I can look it up? I close the other file. If you went like Love Jacobs as your top 2 priorities, probably with Jacobs captain. Jacobs captain because he's a little bit... Oh, wait. What's this? Sorry about that. This is the captain salary. Maybe, all right, so maybe Love captain because he's a little bit lower owned in that role. and he's a little bit less expensive. And then I would try and get both of these guys into that if that's at all possible, which it's probably not. What does that do? It's 36.5 already. I mean, if you're going to be here for the end of the show, we can put it in the lineup builder. I think I would try and do something like that for cash. That's for cash, Jake, that we're talking about there. So Watson for, I don't know about Watson for a cash build, but I do like the idea of Watson in a captain spot overall. Trey says, Jacobs or Adams tonight, who has the bigger game? I know both rush Ds are horrible, but kind of thinking Green Bay gets out ahead. What are you leaning with game theory? 2-point spread with Vegas favored at home. So that's not a big spread. That's cutting into the home field advantage that's naturally cooked in there. So, yeah, I like the idea that Green Bay can at least hang in this game and both teams can put up a decent amount of scoring. I do think that Jacobs and Adams are your 1-1A as far as who's more likely to put up the big score. To me, Devontae's probably got the higher ceiling, but he's more event-based, where Jacobs, I think, is just going to rack up volume, rack up touches. We're talking about a guy who's already touching the ball, 20 times a game? Jacobs, yeah, basically 20 times a game. 15.5 carries and another 6.25 targets, and he catches 5+ of those targets. So just on volume, you could say Jacobs, he's got the more secure floor, but Devontae's probably got the higher ceiling. Gut feeling, which one would I go to? I'd probably go to Devontae just for DFS purposes, a little bit lower owned, and the better, in my opinion, GPP play. But Jacobs is a pretty rock solid option here, and they're equally likely to lead the slate in scoring. I mean, it's very, very close. How risky is fading Adams? I mean, in one lineup, it's fine. In 20 lineups, I certainly wouldn't. In 150, I think it's crazy. It depends on what we're talking about. But for a single entry to just say, like, I'm grabbing Jacobs and Jacoby Myers and Jimmy Garoppolo and, two things from the Green Bay side, sure, yeah, I think that's fine. By the way, Melissa, your key to building that Love or Jacobs and Devontae lineup for cash is probably, and I don't know how popular he's going to be, but in my opinion, Patrick Taylor's going to see some touches here, and he only costs 200, 300. So probably putting him into a flex spot. Check what the ownership looks like. But I would have to imagine that he's gotten popular with the idea of some touches for that salary, and that probably unlocks the ability to put that combination together. Trey's playing two lines, one main in the $20 for a shot. Yeah, I mean, I probably prefer to go, if you're just taking one shot, I'd probably prefer to go with Adams at a little bit lower ownership than Jacobs, assuming that's how it comes out on wherever you're using ownership. But I would probably go with the lower owned between the two stars. Granted, you're paying more to do it, but given higher ceiling, lower ownership, I kind of prefer the Adams play. They're both going to be crazy popular. It's not like you're differentiating via doing that, but you're getting slightly better odds of not being completely duplicated through the nose. And that's really, if you're playing that one lotto ticket shot, you kind of want to have that loose probability of getting in there with 10 dupes instead of 150. So I'd probably go Devontae in that situation. But I do think that you're also totally fine just creating, especially in that kind of a configuration, a lotto ticket type lineup where Watson captain with Love, Jacoby Myers, Austin Hooper, and Jimmy G or something like that. And just hope that the touchdowns don't go Jacobs and Devontae's way. Hope that Devontae puts up 8 catches but only 75 yards and no score. Jacobs puts up 80 yards on 20 touches but no score kind of a day. Maybe Carlson kicks a few field goals. We get an under type game. So I would kind of consider a lineup along those lines if you're just throwing one into that big tournament and you're looking as a lotto ticket for $1 million. I do think you kind of want to go a little bit differentiated there in that spot. So I have no issues with the full fade in that situation of not only one of them, but both of them. So it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for more safety, more floor, I want to cash this ticket. I don't care if I win. I don't care if I'm duped if I win. I just want to cash a ticket, which is another fine way to approach just putting one entry into those massive field tournaments. Then yeah, go with the chalkier guys. Go with the stars and make it easy on yourself. Dennis says being duplicated through the nose sounds painful and unnecessary. Believe me, that is not. You remember the original Total Recall where he's pulling the thing out through his nostril, the tracker beacon, and it's like the size of a golf ball? Feels like that. Trey says, I don't care if I lose, first or last. If you ain't first, you're last. In the famous words of Ricky Bobby's dad. So, yeah, options galore in terms of where the ball could go. I do see a few more snaps and a few more routes for Christian Watson this week. We'll get into the player by player. But I don't think it eats too much into Dobbs. He was still pretty featured. You've got a pretty good option in Jaden Reed, who should still see his normal snaps and some looks there. So I don't mind any of the three receivers, the three primary receivers. I do think we're limited around the tight end position on that offense. And then probably Dontavian Wicks is just kind of coming off the board. Samori Toure, definitely at those prices coming off the board. But from like here up, those guys are interesting. On the ground, you've got A.J. Dillon. He's going to be the featured back. But as somebody in Discord mentioned, he sucks. He's just not been good at all. So I can definitely see some, as I was saying, some touches going in the direction of Patrick Taylor Jr. I think the narrative supports the idea of him getting the ball ahead of Emmanuel Wilson, who was awesome in the preseason. They're both undrafted, but Wilson's a rookie. Taylor's in his third year with the team. Taylor's seen 26% of the snaps on average, but he was back on the practice squad last week. He's barely touched the ball, 3 attempts per game overall. But he had 29 snaps in week 3, 3 carries for 6 yards, 3 of 4 for 29 yards through the air on 24 routes. So he was involved in week 3 when he played. I think there's a little bit more in what's happened over the first couple of weeks. These guys have both been in and out of the lineup. I think there's a little bit more support that Taylor's going to touch the ball a little bit more. They're both 200, 300 on the DK slate. On FanDuel, you get Taylor for 6,000. You get Wilson for 55. It's essentially the same play. I'm giving Taylor more of the touches. Pope says, any thought about Vegas not scoring over 20 points so far? Also, the Raiders have some cornerbacks and safety injuries, and Love has been effective through the air. Yeah, there's banged up guys in the defensive secondary on both sides. I don't get too deep into, as I've said, looking into which corners are in, which corners are out, but I know people value that stuff. So yeah, the idea that this is going to be a pass-focused game, I think it's supported through the 46-point total, the close line. I do think there's a lot of potential for this one to get into a little bit of an air war. Pope, I have the depends on which of those backs you're talking about, but I broke down the offensive and special team snaps. What I care about is the touches. So it was week 3 for Taylor was 29 snaps with the offense, 8 on special teams. So I always try and when I'm talking about the snaps in direct numbers, I'm trying to break down between the two, because that is important. If a guy's out there just playing special teams, it's obviously a lot less valuable. Trey says he kind of likes the Green Bay D. Could be interesting. I do think there's always lanes to play the defenses on both sides. It is a good way to differentiate. You can even play the opposing defense against the quarterback and not really have too much issue. If you get that defensive score, or if you get a game where they just run up a sack total, you only need a handful of points in some of these slots. You got to hit it with the premium options. But yeah, any way that you can differentiate, get lower owned, I think is important. It is a fairly high total. Neither defense projects out great. Neither defense has been performing great. But yeah, there is potential to get to the quarterbacks. Trey says they had a show a little earlier and brought that up if you want to get different. I'm not sure what your... Oh, per ETR. It's a fine point. We can use that to pivot into just the quarterback discussion because we do got to pick up a little bit of time. It's already 6:50. Ridiculous how fast this shit goes. Green Bay gaining pressure 27% of the time on just a 34% blitz rate. On the other side, 57% blitz rate for Vegas, gaining pressure just 17% of the time. Both teams have grabbed 11 sacks so far. I do think that the Green Bay side, probably your better upside for some disruption. Just putting pressure on Jimmy G. Maybe they come up with a solid handful of sacks. But you've also got, when you go to the Green Bay defense, you're going up against, by far, the two best skill players in this game in Jacobs and Adams. So you do have that wrinkle in that, you might get a couple of sacks out of it, or a couple of sacks and a pick, but those guys light up the defense, and it doesn't really matter. I do think it's a game where you probably need to grab the defensive score, the defensive touchdown somehow for the defenses to really pay off. But I think they're in play. On the Vegas side, they've already given up 8 touchdowns through the air. It's one of the worst pass defenses in terms of touchdowns allowed. 6.2 yards per pass attempt, 202 yards a game. Green Bay's given up half as many touchdowns through the air. A 6.2 yard defensive ADOT versus a 6.7 on the other side. It's not insignificant. For Love's purposes, he's throwing the ball 33 times a game. Jimmy, in his 3 games, threw the ball 31 times a game, completing 68% of his passes for 236. He's thrown 5 touchdowns, but he's thrown 6 interceptions in his 3 games. It's not insignificant. Love's only thrown 3 in 4 games. He's also got 8 touchdown passes. 6 of them came in the first 2 weeks. But he's also run the ball in twice. Run the ball 4 times a game, a 4.5 yards per rush attempt. Jimmy, can't imagine him doing much rushing except in an escape mode, especially coming off a concussion. It being a showdown slate, you'll probably see some people roll Aiden O'Connell shares just in case. Jimmy takes a hard shot, comes out of the game, so on and so forth. That's not really my move. I wouldn't tell you you're necessarily making a mistake if you played 150 lineups and you wanted to put that into 1 or 2 of them. But beyond that, I don't like playing guys that are unlikely to even get into the game. Where you really need some kind of significant wild card to happen. If Jimmy G gets banged up in the first quarter, comes out of the game because he hit his head again, it's Aiden O'Connell day. But that's very, very thin. Not my kind of move. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Both of these quarterbacks are in play. Both of these quarterbacks are in play for captain shares, MVP shares on FanDuel. I like them better in the multiplier spot on the FanDuel slate, as we've talked about a bunch of times. It's just a little bit price prohibitive on DK to play the big salaries there. But on this slate, we've got 2 skill players that are more expensive. Were they both more expensive? 15-9, 16-8 versus 14-1 and 14-7. So you've got 2 skill players that are significantly more expensive in the captain spot. I do think that makes both quarterbacks a little bit more playable than quarterbacks normally might be in the captain role. A lot of expensive parts. This might be an interesting one when we jump over to the lineup builder for DK. Curious to see how these come together. I haven't built anything yet. On the ground, A.J. Dillon putting up 2.7 yards per rush attempt so far. Just 11 carries a game. Saw 67% of the snaps last week, 58% on average. That last week was with Aaron Jones coming back, but he played just 18 snaps. He missed weeks 2 and 3. In week 1, he played 28 snaps. But Dillon's gotten his opportunities. He's put up 29 yards a game, 2.7 yards per rush attempt, only 1.2 per carry before contact, 1.5 after. It hasn't been pretty. He's been targeted, not really involved in the passing game, 1.25 targets a game. No touchdowns through the air, no touchdowns on the ground. This is where we get into the idea that maybe Patrick Taylor sees some carries. Taylor, again, didn't play last week, was back on the practice squad last week. But in week 3, he had the 29 snaps, 3 carries for 6 yards. More interesting to me was that he ran 24 routes. He was targeted 4 times. He caught 3 of them for 23 yards. With the idea that Dillon's not really targeted in the passing game, it could be a day where Patrick Taylor just steps in on passing downs and gets some opportunities. I'm not uninterested in that. So it's a significant share of routes on all but 5 of the snaps that he was out there for. He ran a route. On 3 of those other 5 snaps, he carried the ball. Didn't do much with it on the ground. Again, an undrafted player, but he's been with the team. This is his 3rd year with the team. Going back to college days as a junior in 2018, he had 1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns at Memphis. I don't know what happened to him senior year. He didn't have that many, that big a total. I don't know if he got hurt or whatever, but it's a significant enough performance in his junior year back in 2018, 5 years ago in college. But something to hang our hats on. Emmanuel Wilson didn't play in weeks 1 or 4. Week 2, he played 4 total snaps on offense, had 3 carries for 5 yards. He ran 1 route, had 0 targets. Week 3, he played 6 snaps with the offense, had 2 carries for 6 yards. 1-1 on 3 routes for another 6 yards. He was an undrafted rookie this year. In the preseason, he led the NFL with 223 yards on 38 carries in his 3 games. That was 5.9 yards per rush attempt. He had 2 touchdowns. There was an 80-yard long in that 223 yards. So take it with a grain of salt in terms of the total. But he had a pretty significant preseason. As we've discussed a number of times, I don't really care about the preseason, especially when so far, in a limited sense, they've favored the other guy. They've favored Patrick Taylor so far. So if they have to go to one of these guys, I think they just kind of trust Taylor a little bit more. But if you get the idea of Wilson getting the ball, say he gets 10 touches, similar to what he got in the weeks that he played, or 6 to 8 touches on a showdown slate, that's not off the board, especially at 200, 300 on the DK slate. So it's just a question mark of where it goes. But I'm leaning in Patty's direction. Pope says he thinks Love's going to throw 45 times. That would be significant. It's fantasy. I want to get the right guys, obviously. I'm limiting my player pool. Late TD by Renfro. Boy, I've been hunting for that for a while. On the Vegas side, it's a lot more clear-cut in terms of where the ball's going. Josh Jacobs, 76% snaps on average, 15 and a half carries. Another 6.25 targets a game. He hasn't been great, but he's a volume monster. On the season so far, just 2.7 yards per rush attempt. There's 1 rushing touchdown, 1.4 yards before contact, 1.3 after. There's nothing special about those numbers, but the carry volume is significant. The catches, 4.5 catches on 6.25 targets a game. He's been targeted 3 times in the red zone in 4 games. So he's got a monster upside on most slates. Probably one of the safer floors going up against a pretty vulnerable rush defense. They're giving up 155 a game, 4.5 yards per attempt, more than a touchdown a game. But vulnerable rush D on both sides. Between the 2 backups, they're both getting snaps. Amir Abdullah, last week, 21% of the snaps. On average, 16% of the snaps. He's in there on passing downs when Jacobs is out. Jacobs is very involved in the passing attack. He's the primary running back in the passing attack. But between these 2 guys, it's passing downs, rushing downs, as they basically form one backup running back. Abdullah, his 21% snap share in week 4 amounted to 14 snaps with the offense. He ran 14 routes, didn't carry the ball at all. He was targeted on 14.3% of those routes that he ran, so that amounts to 2 targets. He caught both of them, 14 yards. Week 3, 10 snaps, 9 routes run, 3 targets, 2 catches, 16 yards. He's only involved in the passing attack. He has not carried the ball at all this year. Zamir White is the opposite. He saw 7 snaps in week 4, 3 carries for 15 yards, ran 4 routes, but saw 0 targets. Gets carries, no targets. Both are very limited options. Between the 2, I probably prefer Abdullah, considering that he was out there. He ran that many routes. He ran 14 routes last week. Not that they're looking his way as the primary guy by any means, but I think he's the preferred option to me And I don't know why he's not coming up in some of these stats. Probably doesn't qualify for that stat board. I didn't document any red zone targets for him. I don't know. Amir, where are you? 0 targets in the red zone so far. Oh, no, excuse me. 1 target in the red zone. That came in week 1. But again, just out there for his passing game ability and a very limited target for them. So it's really primarily all about Josh Jacobs in that rushing game. I would go to Abdullah next for flex shares and then a sprinkling of Zamir White. If White gets I probably should have typed Zamir instead of White. White's carried the ball once in the red zone in 3 of 4 weeks, in each of 3 out of 4 weeks. That was a clunky way to say that. Week 1, week 2, and week 4, he got 1 touch each of those weeks in the red zone. If he gets the right touch, the right carry in the red zone, it could pay off on a showdown slate. So he's not off the board, but I prefer Abdullah between those two. Slightly, and minimal shares. In the passing game, let's start here with the big obvious guy. Devontae, first in targets per route run. He's a monster against the zone, which is what he's going to be facing. He's banged up. He's got a shoulder injury, but I don't think it really matters. Week 4, he went 8 of 13, but only 75 yards. If you get that game from him today, that's kind of the game I was talking about where you could sneak some of those other plays past. If you get that game and then you get Jacobs not scoring somehow on the ground, getting away from those two guys in that one lineup scenario that we were talking about before kind of makes some sense. That said, if you get the week 2 game, or the week 3 game rather, you're probably going to want him. That week, 13 of 20 for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also keep in mind that week 4 was played without Jimmy G. It seems like he's got a decent connection. His weekly red zone targets over 4 games have gone up. 1 target in each of the first 2 weeks, 3 targets in the red zone in week 3, 5 targets in the red zone in week 4. Didn't convert any of them. 2.9 yards per route run this year. He's an absolute monster. Did we miss anything in talking about him? An 11.4 yard ADOT, 13.9% of the air yards, 38.2% of the targets. Jacoby Myers, the other prime target in the offense, 19.8% of the targets overall. He drew just 4 targets in week 4, ran 41 routes, 2 of 4 for 33 yards. In week 3, the interesting part, playing with Jimmy, the week that Devontae went off for that monster game and had 20 targets, 13 of 20 again, 13 of 20, 172 and 2 touchdowns. That same week, Jacoby Myers, 7 catches on 12 targets for 85 yards. Didn't get in the end zone, but that's not an insignificant target share when the other receiver's going off. So I think you can play both of them in lineups. I think Jacoby Myers is obviously not equal to Davante Adams, but he's a significant target out there. Week 1, 9 catches on 10 targets, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns. You get that game? Forget it. That is huge. Red zone targets, 3 targets in week 1, didn't play week 2, 2 targets, 1 target in the red zone. They've gone down each week, but a 10.1 yard ADOT, 7.65 yards per target, 1.9 yards per route run. Definitely a significant option in that offense. Somebody mentioned Renfrow in the chat before. I've been trying to make Hunter Renfrow happen this year, and it just hasn't happened. It's like fetch. 45% of the snaps last week, 45% on average. Ran routes on 87% of the 45% snaps last week. 77% route run rate on the season. He was targeted on 15% of the routes that he ran last week. He's been targeted on 9% of the routes that he's run for the season. That amounts to 2 targets a game. He's put up 0.6 yards per target so far. Or is that per target or per route run? I wrote per target, but I think I meant, per route run. 0.6 yards per route run. In week 4, he played 30 snaps with the offense. He ran 26 routes, 2 of 4 for 12 yards. Week 3, he played 36 snaps with the offense. He ran 28 routes, 2 of 2 for 17. He's got 1 target in the red zone. It came last week. No touchdowns. He's been really, really limited out there. He was a receiver that, week one, I either talked about him or wrote about him saying, I think he's sneaky, think he's a talented guy. Just has not done anything out there this season. Overall target share for the season, 5.3%, 2 a game. Getting similar targets to Austin Hooper, who I think I actually like better in the offense this week. 10.1 yard ADOT is good, but not if they're not throwing him the ball. Just 1.4% of the air yards. 0. Well, according to one source, he got the target in the red zone. I'm going to believe the main one that I'm looking at. Trust but verify. Let me pull it up. Yeah, targeted in the red zone last week. So the board again here is wrong. I'm going to find a better option if this one's going to keep being incorrect. It's the same one consistently that's off. So Renfro, definitely playable because he's going to be out there running routes. The poor guy's out there just futilely running routes a lot of the time. You're going to need the week where they start to look his direction. It's encouraging that he got a target in the red zone last week, I guess. He's out there about half the snaps, and he's always running routes. He's always out there on the passing downs. So he's not uninteresting. He's definitely more interesting than DeAndre Carter or Trey Tucker. Carter, 1 target in each of the first 3 weeks, 0 targets last week. His snaps with the offense each week have been 9, 8, 8, and 8. And he's run 3, 6, 5, and 5 routes. So you're talking about a very limited option who's just not going to be out there all that much unless something goes haywire. Trey Tucker played 18 snaps in week 4. He ran 14 routes, which is kind of interesting. But he saw 0 targets. He played 9 snaps week 3, 0 targets on 9 routes. 9 snaps week 2, 1 target on 5 routes. He caught that one for 34 yards. It's the only catch he made all season. Again, really, really hyper limited options down there. They're 200, 300, but I prefer the running backs from the Green Bay side if you're looking for $200, $300 players. At the tight end position, Austin Hooper. 2 targets on 26 routes last week. Caught 1 of them for 11 yards. 0 targets on 29 routes in week 3. 2 of 2 for 20 yards on 14 routes in week 2. 1 of 1 for 20 yards on 13 routes run in week 1. He's the main route runner at tight end. I'll give him that. Michael Mayer outsnapped 55 to 34 last week by Hooper. He saw 36 snaps, ran 13 routes, was not targeted. He saw 1 target each of weeks 2 and 3, ran 9 routes in week 2, 18 in week 3, has 1 catch for 2 yards in 3 weeks. 0 red zone targets. Not great. Hooper for 600, 900. We'll go by this one, but that's probably wrong. I think Hooper got targeted in the red zone. Nope. Hooper's not been targeted in the red zone yet. But he's the guy who's out there running most of these routes, seeing a fair amount of snaps. 51% of the snaps last week, 57% on average. So I think we're just looking for the guy with the more opportunities. On the Green Bay side, you've got Watson back. Last week, Watson was back. He played 46% of the snaps. Ran routes on 69% of the 46% snaps that he played, which amounted to routes on 44% of their dropbacks. Had 11.1% of the targets. That amounted to 18 total routes, on which he was targeted 22% of the time, which means he went 2 for 4 for 25 yards. But he scored a touchdown. Got a red zone target and converted it for a touchdown. 1.4 yards per route run last week. He was kind of managed in what he was allowed to do. Obviously, when he's fully back, he's going to be the primary target. He's going to be out there for most of the snaps. So they're working him back in slowly, but the fact that they targeted him in the red zone was encouraging. Had a 10.3 yard ADOT, 6.25 yards per target, and the fact that he scored on limited targets, on limited opportunities, is significant. Like I said before, Romeo Doubs played 88% of the snaps last week with Watson coming back. Still had 13 targets. Ran routes on 72% of his snaps. He was targeted on 36% of those routes. He also had 12 targets the week before. Week 4, he went 9 of 13 for 95 yards. Didn't score, but tons of targets. Caught a lot of them. Put up some yardage. 2.57 yards per route run. 29.9% of the air yards overall. Jaden Reed played 67% of the snaps. He's their primary guy out of the slot. Ran routes on 68% of those. Targeted on 20% of those routes. 2.2 yards per route run. 3 of 5, 55 yards, no touchdowns. In week 2 at Atlanta, he scored 2 touchdowns, 8 targets that week. Significant number of red zone targets. 2 last week, 4 in week 3, 3 in week 2. Overall, he's 7th in deep targets and 2nd in red zone targets. Not insignificant. A 13.6 yard ADOT. 19.4% of the targets so far. And 7 looks in the red zone. Not bad. Doubs sharing that same seven targets in the red zone so far. Obviously, Watson's going to cut into that for both of these guys. But Jaden Reed still very playable as the primary weapon out of the slot for them. Musgrave banged his head last week, went into the concussion protocol, played 25% of the snaps before that. Going to be back on the field, should be fully engaged, supposed to be fully healthy. 3 red zone targets on the year. 16% of the targets overall. Oh, that's right. He had similar numbers across the board. 16% for all of targets, air yard share, and first read share. So when he's out there running routes, he's getting a couple looks, a couple opportunities. He's going to be the primary weapon at tight end. Last week, DeGara stepped in 33 snaps after Musgrave went out. He ran 24 routes. He was targeted 4 times. Caught all 4 of them for 34 yards. 0 red zone targets. Only 16 snaps with the offense each of weeks 2 and 3. 19 snaps with the offense in week 1. He had 2 targets week 2, 0 targets in week 1 or 3. He is a very limited touchdown-dependent option at tight end who, unless something happens to Musgrave, is not going to be out there that much. Dontavian Wicks dropped to 31 snaps last week, had just 1 target on 23 routes, 0 catches. In week 3, he had 6 targets and 4 catches on for 45 yards on 47 snaps. So he took a significant hit in his snaps last week, but he was still out there. 23 routes is, it's a fair number of shots if they look his direction. It's just a matter of they only looked his way once on those 23 routes and he didn't catch the ball. Week 2, just 24 snaps, but 15 routes run and 4 targets. He went 2 of 4 for 40 yards and a touchdown. Had red zone targets in each week from weeks 1 through 3. Then Samori Toure, only 10 snaps with the offense last week. 8 routes run, targeted once, caught it for 35 yards. In week 3, 30 snaps, went over 3. Didn't catch any of his 3 targets. Caught 1 of 2 for 6 yards in week 2. 21 snaps with the offense, went 2 of 3 for 18 yards in week 1. Has not really been involved, and with obviously a big domino clicking back into place, I think we're just losing Toure off the bottom of the board there. Very limited, but semi-playable in flex spots because it's a showdown slate, and if they happen to score a touchdown on their limited opportunities, you're kind of in business at low ownership. The primary tight end, coming off a concussion. All 3 of these guys are my preferred options. Definitely going to have a fair share of all 3 of those guys. On this side, it's a clear 1-2, and then like capable mixers, and really not much else. Defenses, kickers, all in play in their usual form. We probably need some scoring out of the defenses, but we do have a pretty decent pressure rate for Green Bay. So there's that. But kicking, the brotherly kicking duel. Trey says, I told you I was worried about the Braves playoffs pitching come playoff time. What happened to Fried? Realmuto hit a 2-run homer. He was my pick from the Phillies to home run today. Good for me. Hopefully somebody played that. Yeah, it sucks, the Braves pitching. It also sucks that, they run into the Phillies in their first round. Not great to have a division opponent immediately up like that. But a lot of firepower in that offense. Could get back into it for sure. Pope says, I haven't played FanDuel. Same for captains. FanDuel does not multiply the captain's salary, the MVP salary. Multiplies the points, not the salary. It's a significant difference in how your lineups will come together. Has a big impact on pretty much just the primary stars, the highly projected guys, the quarterbacks become the MVP plays. And if you go down board like 2 spots, everybody's low owned. Very different game on FanDuel. With that in mind, let's grab a couple minutes to look at some lineups. So, let's look at what a love captain lineup looks like. Actually, yeah, I want to see that lineup that I was saying before. So if you went that route, you'd have just 4,500 left to spend. But if you did this, you're back to being fine. This is more like that cash lineup that we were talking about. There's no way that's unique 0 times. Pat Taylor probably doesn't have an ownership projection. Yeah, that's what it was. Let's call it... This is DK. What do you think? 8%? I don't know. Call it the same thing on actually on FanDuel it'll be less. I guess I can look it up. Hang on, let me see if I can grab a somebody's. No, I shouldn't leave that up there though. Still not projected in their ownership. That's annoying. Let's see if they got him on RG. All right. I'm going to make it up and say that he's going to be like 10% owned on RG. I have to imagine people are talking about him. So that brings it to, yeah. See what a difference that makes, though? Changing this guy from, obviously, from a 0 has a significant impact. But changing him to just 10% owned makes it significantly duped. Let's say he's 5% owned. Get down to, well, obviously it cuts it in half. Dummy. But yeah, you would need him to go low owned. But I think like a cash lineup, that's not, you know, god awful. Obviously, I don't know that Jaden Reed's necessarily the best play for cash, but everybody outside of him, it was Melissa that was asking. And it leaves you, if you did it like that, it would be 6,300 to spend, so you could go with a defense or something like that. But again, I don't really play much cash. I do think he's going to be like 10% on, though. Tournament-wise, somebody was saying Watson captain, I think. I think I heard that out there. We would want Jordan Love with him, obviously. It's difficult not to just keep putting the Taylor play in there, but let's say we didn't want to do that. You get a really cheap Austin Hooper in there, though. Touchdown dependent. But then you could do like a Jimmy G and probably still have enough for Devontae. Although, if I'm giving Hooper that touchdown, I might go Jacobs instead of Devontae, and I'm saving a little bit of money there. Probably more popular, but saving a little bit of money and gives me 79, so I can get to, I've got Watson in the captain spot, so I don't need him there. But I could go like Myers, obviously Jaden Reed, basically anything. Go A.J. Dillon very, very easily. Let's say we went Dillon instead of Hooper, Adams instead of Jacobs. That leaves us just 33. That becomes interesting. Renfro? Do 27 times. It's a lot of popular plays in that one. You could go up from A.J. Dillon to, what, 57? Musgrave, meh. And that's probably going to be a lot. That's an interesting way to do it. Spend a little bit more, go up to Luke Musgrave there. A less popular option. So you cut your dupes. You're paying up to a lower projected player, but you cut your dupes significantly with, bad running back versus probably involved tight end option. If he gets the touchdown, it's all about where these touchdowns go with some of these options. This is highly playable. I mean, if you chop 13 ways for what's the prize on DK tonight? $500,000, $1 million? You chop that 13 ways, you're doing okay. So that's playable. Let's see what the chat's saying. Mamba says, easy money on my Phillies. Hope everybody stayed with the play I gave. We'll win it all, so bet them every day. Look at Mamba. Fearless out there. Fearless about the jinx. That's Philly for you. My pals in Philly. Fearlessly cocky. You have a great team, though. I love the lineup. I love the pitching staff. There's nothing that should get in the Phillies' way. Let's put it that way. Except for maybe the Dodgers. Trey says, I'm hoping Green Bay gets ahead late and Taylor gets more mop-up work. That'd be great. I don't know that we're looking at either of the defenses all that much or either of the kickers in the captain spot, really. If we wanted to go to an oddball captain, though, like Jacoby Myers, he sees a significant amount of targets. Or you could go Doubs in the captain spot. Doubs actually being a little bit more expensive than Watson. We kind of just did that one. I think in terms of cheap captains, I kind of like the Myers option. I don't think you got the volume to support something like this, which is just kind of crazy. But if you did it, you'd have a significant amount of money to spend on each spot. So you could easily go and still have 8,700. So it's essentially a play anything you want if you did that. He's probably just not projected for ownership in the captain spot either. So annoying. Yep. Let's call that. Say 1% of people put him in the captain spot. That's the wrong guy. No, it's not. So if that's 1% of people put him in the captain spot and use just all the top options with him, that's duped 25 times. And you still do need him to do something in the captain spot. So that's how those options, it does look appealing. I'm only spending $300 on my captain for a guy who might touch the ball a few times, but that might touch the ball becomes very, very weighty in that spot. Especially if one of these guys gets in the end zone, starts to rack up some points. You've got too much ownership on these guys in the captain role that you'll just get steamrolled by just too many lineups to be able to make up the difference. Because everything else that connects with these guys is going to be scoring points for those other lineups that are already ahead of you. Unless you got him to have the big day, obviously that's what you need, and then you have a monster on your hands. But you're still duped 25% of the time if you just straight line the other options. If you swap Watson in there, you'd be talking about 29 times. Let's say you went just, all right, I need another oddball in there. Throw Renfro in there. Now you're dealing with two low probability options, and you're still duped 7 times. 7 times, again, not bad. If you're splitting $1 million 7 ways, you're doing well for yourself. But it's just a limiting option despite the appeal of the price up there. Maybe a little bit more realistic. Just on the idea of a right opportunity. But again, not something I really like all that much. I do like the Myers one, though. I would want to go Myers, Jimmy. You can play Jacobs with it. There's enough there to support that. But I don't know that I would want to go. I think there's volume to support Myers and Adams like we saw in that week 3 game. Myers saw a bunch of targets and put up a bunch of yards that game. But you're probably either splitting the touchdowns or one guy will have no touchdown. So I think you got a little bit more equity for 2 touchdowns. For 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown. Than 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown. Right? If that makes sense. What else can we throw in here? Make it like a Vegas Wipeout? Nah, I don't love that. We'll go to Dylan. Daubs. This is chalky. 67 to spend. Try and get a little different. Like, no love in that one. Ugh, yeah, I don't like this one at all. There you go, love. Then we get a chop out Daubs, but we get 51. We could spend our 51 on... we're 100 short of Musgrave. That's interesting. Oh, whoops. Did I delete his price, not his name? That's interesting that you can't get Musgrave into this lineup. If we went... yeesh, 53 times. I don't love that. The fact that it's owned that much, I really don't like. Yeah. Fucking DraftKings. Oh, right. It's just Packers. FanDuel uses the full name, and DraftKings just uses the team name. And I forgot to change it. 38 times. It's a little bit better than that one that was up there a minute ago, but yeah, probably just popular with both QBs and Jacobs in there. Jacobs is probably the big one that's screwing that all up. If you did that same lineup with Adams and went to, instead of him, say, Renfro. Well, now I'm splitting that too many ways in the passing game there. Dylan Watson and then 7,900. This one's a little tricky if you go with Myers in the captain spot. I don't love what we're coming up with here. Like Jayden Reed. 81 times duped. Screw that. Just because it's a challenging build, I kind of like going to it. See what we can put together. But we're not coming up that great with this one. Let's give FanDuel a minute's worth of love. Nick Topian. Yeah. I'll get a couple in here, buddy. FanDuel's just a lot less dynamic, a lot less interesting because you don't have that salary multiplier in the captain role. I mean, these are just going to be stupid popular. Yes, 1,400 in the captain spot. So like the most popular possible construction. And then like try and get weird with it. This will still be 80 times, 20 times. Oh, nope, spent too much. Wait, what? Oh, because I looked at Michael Mayer's salary. Abdullah, can't afford Abdullah. You get Wicks, but that's pretty unlikely. That's an interesting one as like a dart throw lineup. If you put Wicks and Reed into that with Jordan Love, take the really unlikely possibilities of touchdowns, and it's still duped 10 times. $82 per. Like that. Give it a little bit more likelihood, and then you get 85. So you could do like a kicker. 101 times duped. So it's just straightforward on FanDuel with like all these guys just draw so much popularity in the MVP spot. That's why with FanDuel I like going to differentiated options in the captain spot. Like that same base construction. Now I've got $9,000 to spend per spot. So I could go to like Daubs being cheaper on FanDuel is nice. I don't love Mayer there. Stuck in that same spot where Abdullah's 500 more. Put myself right back at 7,000. That wasn't a great decision. I guess you go Musgrave and gain the $1,000, and then you got 10 to spend, so you could go like Musgrave and Reed, but back to Reed. Reed's at a weird price here. I do think there's enough to support it, but he could probably stand to be a little bit less expensive, and that would make this a better board to put shit together. Dylan, I don't love. 39 times duped. That's going to be a popular build for Myers lineups. If you want to put... let's go Jacobs there. And we got to get different here. That's not bad. That lineup plays. Dupe 6 times, but at that point, I'm kind of good with that. And I don't know that that's actually going to be the case. You get Daubs, his quarterback, their slot receiver, and the Packers' D. We need, as we discussed when we were talking about that spot with all the pressure that they gain, they're still going to be going up against two major weapons in Devontae and Josh Jacobs, the two highest projected scorers on the slate are against that defense. But this configuration allows for Devontae not having a game. Packers end up shutting Devontae down or keeping him to 75 yards. It's kind of like the game he had in week 4. Jacobs does what he does, even if he gets in the end zone. If the Packers are doing their thing, maybe you get enough there. With that limited ownership, I would venture to guess that this lineup will at least make it into my pool, and it looks pretty playable. Speaking of which, I don't know if I put placeholders in, which would be a disaster at this point. I really hope I did. Oh, good. There's still a lot of spots open. Well, only 77,000 entries out of 99,000 spots filled on FanDuel less than an hour before the tournament starts. So that's interesting. I'm just going to put this in as my placeholder. Nobody play this lineup. Not that I think it's a must play by any means, but I kind of like it, and I'm just going to put it in right now as my placeholder, which means it'll end up in the tournament. So if you play this one and it wins, you'll be duped with me. I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to say or do things like that. I don't want to get all of us banned from FanDuel. This is in no way a group effort. We're not chopping profits in any way other than through happenstance. If somebody happens to use that lineup, I dropped my phone on the keyboard and the dog panicked and ran out of the room. All right, let me get these placeholders entered, and I'll do one more, and then I got to get out of here and get lineups actually built. Otherwise, I'm just playing this one 150 times. Who you guys want to see in the captain spot? You can, let me do like a read. Again, it's very straightforward. We're just kind of moving pieces around. We're moving deck chairs on FanDuel because the multiplier doesn't exist for the salary, so it doesn't really matter. But like, let's do a weird one. There you go. That one's only duped 3 times. You need a touchdown dependent on Jaden Reed. 2 scores out of the slot. You got both primaries in the receiving game for the Raiders. The Green Bay quarterback and then the dart throw Green Bay running back. It's not crazy. It kind of feeds the narrative of like Love's throwing the ball, but Watson and Daubs kind of cancel one another out. Neither one gets in the end zone. Reed gets the touchdown. And then Patty Taylor's getting some carries. And you get both the big receivers on the Vegas side. That's not bad. Jake says Kirk Cousins is better than Dak, and I'm a Cowboys fan. I think I agree with Kirk Cousins being better than Dak. I'm not a Cowboys fan, but I agree with the premise. Mom is giving away a lineup not duped. Adams, captain. Watson, Dillon, Hooper, Jacobs, Jimmy G. There you go. The hell? Did I click on the wrong thing? Oh, shit. All right, I got to go. I clicked on the wrong thing. I got to cancel a bunch of these entries now. All right, guys. That's the slate. Good luck out there. Somebody go win something. I'll see you tomorrow.